Greetings, xin chào, namaskar. Social media has a way of making the ordinary extraordinary. All it takes is a well-timed joke, a chance encounter, or a provocative hashtag, and suddenly the whole world is trending on a previously unknown person. Many of us complain about social media. Some of us are addicted to it, and often it's seen as the source of fake news, cyberbullying, and hate speech. But the real power of social media is not in how it divides and isolates us, but in the greater power it has to educate, to curate, to expose, to explain. Social media has the key to preserving our past, and it may very well save our future. Nelson Mandela once famously said, "If you speak to a man in a language he understands, it goes to his head. But if you speak to him in his language, it goes to his heart." This became clear to me the morning I woke up and found my face plastered across newspapers after speaking to a reporter about a simple project I had started with a notebook and an Instagram account. See, my husband is from India, and if you incorrectly assumed that his native tongue is Hindi, you wouldn't be the first. Hindi is just one of 23 official languages used in Indian governments. And it's spoken by only just over a quarter of the 1.3 billion Indian citizens. My husband is from the southern state of Kerala, home to the language of Malayalam, spoken by over 40 million Malayalis. Yet, there aren't many resources for non-native speakers to learn this language from. Being a language teacher myself, and a very stubborn one at that, I used a PDF of a textbook from the 1960s, a linguistical analysis of Malayalam grammar, and the ever-thinning patience of my husband to create a studygram to document my learning journey. This made a lot of people excited. You see, while everyone is in the rush to learn English, here is the humble American's attempt at learning Malayalam. My words, poorly pronounced, made their way into the hearts of thousands around the world. The fact that I was learning this language wasn't what made it interesting. It was the fact that someone from outside the community took this language and gave it a value that it didn't have in mainstream media. When your language gets sidelined in favor of English due to globalization, and it finally reaches some kind of publicity, you feel seen. Language is deeply tied to identity. My stepmother immigrated from former Yugoslavia to Chicago in the 1970s. She became fully fluent in English, but maintained her mother tongue at home for communication within her family. However, after marrying my father, who had very little interest in learning the language, my half-brother grew up not being exposed enough to become fluent in his own mother tongue. Now at 24, he feels quite sturdy in his American identity, but doesn't have much tying him to his Slavic roots, which are half his DNA. His story is just one of the hundreds of millions of those whose mother tongues have slid through the cracks. In fact, it is estimated that 22 languages per year will die, given up as offerings, taken as sacrifices in exchange for the promise of a better future. Identity is not the only thing lost when a language dies, it is also information. As indigenous languages dim and fade, so do ecological concepts that could be very essential now in this age of the increased need for sustainability. Descriptions of plants, animals, and agricultural practices fade over time as the tongue becomes unfamiliar with the language that the land once had. New generations of these communities can't even comprehend their own oral history and traditions because they aren't taught the language which their elders speak. Vietnam is home to dozens of languages, a testament of its diversity. But as these mountainous communities and linguistic minorities assimilate to majority languages, their knowledge too will become lost. We often see signs in English, French, and Vietnamese, but would anyone be able to recognize a sign written in Nung? Social media has the power to preserve languages. All it takes is for someone to upload a video or other kinds of educational, engaging content to support these linguistic communities. No longer do people need to search for old books with outdated formats of language learning. And it doesn't just stop with language. When I was in college, I lived in the foothills of the Appalachia in the southern United States. Back then, we only had MySpace and the now defunct Zanga, where I would write my angsty teenage poetry. I worked at a photo department in a retail drugstore chain. One day, I received a large order of 300 photos. As I watched the photos print from the machine, I noticed gorgeous landscapes, mountains and forests and untouched nature. When my customer came to pick up her order, I complimented the photos and asked her where they were taken. She smiled at me. "Oh, my daughter is serving a military tour in Afghanistan. She sent these pictures." If you had asked me what Afghanistan looked like, I would have imagined a barren, war-torn region, nothing like these photos that I had seen. And I realized that even though I considered myself to be a worldly, educated, open-minded person, I actually knew very little outside of my prescribed schooling. In fact, it wasn't until college that I was studying the rich kingdoms across the nations of Africa that at some points in history were wealthier than various kingdoms in Europe. Even more embarrassing to admit, I didn't even realize till I moved to the Middle East that Arabs have a variety of complexions. The reason I didn't know this is because of the Eurocentric colonialist narrative that I was taught from growing up. And I didn't have any other exposure to any other kind of narrative that would allow me to question it. What social media does is it allows a variety of narratives to exist. People can upload stories representing their communities and show the stories behind their people. People from these communities can show exactly what happened as it happened and tell it with their own voice, a way of saying, yes, we are here. Yes, this did happen. And no amount of whitewashing will remove this history from these pages. So whether it's photographs of Japanese prisoners at internment camps in America, or videos of indigenous Alaskans performing traditional dances to contemporary rap, social media allows for an advanced web of narratives that empower the narrators. Which brings me to my next point. When you Google Vietnam, what do you usually see? Once you scroll past the news articles and a few of the big business pages, you'll find tour guides or video travel vlogs related to Vietnam, and they're usually made by people who have little to no connection to the country itself, which means that if someone wants to learn about Vietnam, they're learning about it through another foreigner. This can reduce the rich culture of Vietnam and the history to just simply eating durian and drinking egg coffee. When I went to the Women's Museum here in Hanoi, I read on the 47 different cultures, the 47 different ethnic groups that reside within the region. As I walked through each exhibit learning about marriage, child-rearing, and domestic duties, it occurred to me that many of us who live outside of Vietnam would see the country as a monolith. There would be no nuance or diversity within the peoples inside of it. It also occurred to me that the Vietnamese people themselves may also start to forget these differences within their cultures in the future as globalization continues. What social media does is it allows people within these communities to make themselves seen and document their traditions without having to appeal to big media houses or get approval from education boards to be featured in a textbook. Not only does it connect people in the communities within the motherland, but it also connects the diaspora, which means that someone who has grown up outside of their country or their culture doesn't have to learn about themselves through a tourist. Social media is not just a place to bring together communities, it's also a place to educate and bring attention to social issues. When my content became viral, I gained over 10,000 followers in less than 30 days, and it has continued to rise since then. Most of my followers are Indians who are quite frankly fascinated with this white girl trying to speak a lesser-known Indian language. But with this attention also came a sense of responsibility. that I need to be sure that I portray Kerala culture in a nuanced and balanced way, as well as feature other creators within the community doing similar things, but not getting the traction they deserve. Now, after getting the elusive blue tick and getting closer to 40,000 followers, it remains clear to me that I continue to create educational, helpful content, as well as engage with social issues with working with other creators that help guide my content. If you're not a fan of social media, I understand. At first glance, all the pointless selfies, the hyper-colorful food pics, and the privileged aesthetic of a backpacker can be really putting off. However, these same tools that can make someone from anyone are the same tools that we can use to link our past to our future. American author Jonathan Mayberry once wrote, "A sword in itself is not good or evil. A sword can be used to slay an enemy. A sword can be used to free a suffering friend into the darkness. A sword can be used to cut the ropes of the helpless. A raised sword can be a threat, but it can also be a symbol of leadership. A weapon is only good or evil in the intention of those who hold it." So, because of fake news and hate speech, we tend to see social media as a divisive, destructive weapon. But in the hands of the compassionate and the optimistic, we can use it to cut a path that will connect us. I'd like to end this talk with a quote from the Malayali poet Valatho Narayana Menon. "Bharatam enna puritam aganam andarangam. Keralam enna kettal Tilakanam chora nirambogalil." When you hear the name of the Indian subcontinent, you should be filled with pride. When you hear the name of Kerala, the blood should boil in your veins. I hope that everyone has a chance to feel their heart pumping with pride when they hear of their native place, their native people, or their native tongue, no matter where they end up in the world. Nani, come on. Thank you.